number 10 spot we have the middle of nowhere. This story starts off when this person was really young and on a camping trip with their family. They went to bed around 10 p.m. one night in their sleeping bag inside of the tent, and both their older brother and their mom were also there, and they were also heading to bed at the same time. This is all pretty normal camping stuff so far, but this is when things get a little weird. After falling asleep, the next thing this person remembers is waking up in the middle of the night, but they weren't in the tent anymore, and now they were suddenly somewhere in the middle of the woods, but they were still in the sleeping bag that they fell asleep in. Obviously this would be absolutely terrifying to anyone, especially a child, so they start yelling for their mom, who then began yelling back, and of course both of them were pretty panicked. Luckily they weren't too far from each other, so the mom quickly found them and everyone was totally safe and sound. But to this day they still don't know how they ended up all the way out there in the middle of the woods, still inside their sleeping bag. In our number 9 spot today we have the killer dog. This story starts off with the storyteller hiking a trail with a few others. The group was descending the trail and they came across a family who had a dog with them. This family was standing more off to the side of the trail and they weren't moving, so our storyteller's group just kept descending down and walked past them. As they were passing, they realized that this family is all standing in a circle holding hands and the dog is in the middle of them. The first thought was that they were most likely praying, which is of course totally fine, but when they heard exactly what they were praying for, things got quite a bit more creepy. As they were walking past, they hear the dad of the family say, "Lord, please do not let this dog kill again." Excuse me? I have absolutely no idea what is going on with that dog, but I definitely wouldn't have wanted to be near when I heard the family say that. Needless to say, that group chose to hike some other trails on their camping trips from that point on. In our number 8 spot today we have the masked stranger. Sometimes we see things, and while nothing overtly terrible happens, we just know that something very suspicious is going on. That is what happened on this person's camping trip at a site in Colorado. This person was just having an average camping day when a strange man walked out of the wooded area holding a very large knife, and for some reason he was also wearing a beekeeper hood. It was close to dusk at this point and he just walked through the camping area and then just headed back into the wooded area on the other side. Where was he going? Why did he have a knife? Why did he have a hood? I have a lot of questions for this man because this is certainly not normal camping behavior. If anyone out there has any idea of what this guy could have been doing, please let me know because I feel like I am going to have nightmares about this situation now. In our number 7 spot today we have help. This story takes place on a camping trip at 11 p.m. when everyone was sleeping. This is of course in the forest, so it is very dark and you definitely would need a flashlight to see what's going on around you. This is a family camping trip, so there's a few people there, including one kid who's about 3 years old at the time. Since he's only 3, he can't speak in full sentences yet, but he obviously knows words. Anyway, so it's 11 at night, everyone's asleep, and then this 3-year-old starts crying, which wakes everyone up. The kid's dad of course asks him what's wrong, and the 3-year-old just keeps repeating, "Help, guy come." No one knows what this means, and the kid is obviously really frightened, which of course absolutely freaks everyone else out. No one slept for the rest of the night because of course they were terrified of whatever this child may have seen. I am hoping that this was just a bad dream that the kid had and that there was never any strange man. In our number 6 spot today we have the tent roof. This story starts off with a couple who took a camping trip when they were just 19 years old. The couple was at a camping site in northern Scotland and they were in their tent. It was just before bed, so it was of course dark out, and one of them was reading a book by the light of a flashlight. Nothing too crazy, but then all of a sudden the top of the tent starts coming down towards them. The roof was going down so far that they had to lay down in order for it to not touch them. As they're laying there, this is when one of them realizes that they can clearly see 10 fingertips right in front of their face pushing down the top of the tent. Who is doing this and why? I honestly have no idea. Maybe they were trying to see if someone was in the tent, but then that leads me to the question of why would they want to know? Unfortunately, we'll probably never know for sure. In our number 5 spot today we have Florida camping. This camping story comes from Florida and man, this one grosses me out. This person was winding down from a beautiful day in the wilderness and was ready for bed, but as soon as it got dark, suddenly their tent was absolutely covered in hundreds of rats. I'm honestly stressed out just thinking about this. They explained that these rats were absolutely everywhere. They were climbing up the ropes and were even on top of the tent. This camper got out of the tent and started a fire. They stayed up all night because, of course, how could you possibly sleep after that? The rats left and this person felt like they had all gone and hopefully all the rats just moved to another spot, so this person decided to risk it and stay another night, which I personally think is insane. Of course, once it got dark again, the rats returned and it seemed like there were even more this time. The camper did the same thing as the night before and got the fire started, which again made all of the rats leave, thankfully. When morning hit, they packed up their camping equipment because it was most definitely time to head to another spot. Has anyone else experienced this kind of a thing? I honestly probably would have packed up and left immediately if I ever had to go through that. In our number 4 spot today, we have the dawn hike. This story is one that I absolutely could not imagine. One day, 2 guys were hiking at dawn on one of their camping trips. I feel like dawn would be such a nice time to go hiking because you can get the most beautiful sunrise view. Anyway, the 2 were walking along the path when one of them hears a zing right by their ear. They said at first they thought it was like a bird chirp or something, but then a second later, right in front of them, they hear and see a tree pop and crack. This is when they both realize at the same time that they've just been shot at. And considering how close all of the sounds were, they were very close to actually being hit. They book it out of there and of course head to tell a park ranger, which is the best thing to do in that situation. The ranger of course quickly went to investigate and they found a man who was hunting illegally. Thank goodness no one got hurt and that they were able to stop this man before anything worse happened. I'm not sure if he thought those 2 guys were animals or something, or if he was trying to shoot at something else, but this whole situation could have been very, very bad. In our number 3 spot today, we have group camp. This story starts off with a group of friends all on a camping trip together, which I have to say really does sound like a very fun time. One night on this trip, they were all sitting around the fire hanging out when something strange began to happen. Someone or something began throwing rocks at them and their tent. They all looked around and searched a bit to try and find out where the rocks were coming from, but it was so dark they couldn't really see anything. They figured that maybe it was just some people from another site close by who were trying to play some sort of freaky prank or something like that. A few hours later, after this weird rock incident, they heard an absolutely piercing scream coming from the woods. Could these 2 things be related? Who knows for sure, but it is definitely safe to say that the friends didn't really sleep much for the rest of the night. In our number 2 spot today, we have this old crime scene. This story starts off with this person's annual trip to see their dad. Every summer the pair would take a trip to go camping in the mountains, but one year they had an experience they'll never forget. They were hiking down a slope when they saw a really old rifle sticking out from a tree. This is obviously unusual, so they got closer to check it out and they realized that it had obviously been there for quite some time as the tree had grown around the rifle. As they got even closer, they noticed a small cave which they decided to go into. This is when they found a few personal items like cans of unopened food, a rusted pot, and an old wool blanket. You know, things that made it seem like at some point someone was living inside of this cave. The dad went over to the blanket and unrolled it, and this is when it revealed a shirt with holes and blood stains that was all crumpled up inside of this blanket. Did these 2 stumble upon some super old crime scene? They unfortunately aren't exactly sure what happened here, but it is all very, very suspicious. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the whistling. This very eerie story comes from a couple and it takes place at a pretty empty campsite that was located in California. The pair set up their camp, made some food for dinner, and headed to bed one night, but in the middle of their sleep they were woken up by a sound. This sound was actually the sound of a person whistling in the tune of When the Saints Come Marching In. The pair laid frozen in fear, just hoping that if they remained silent, this person would just carry on with their business, but things took an even creepier turn. The whistling turned into chanting, and this person was saying, "When you sleep here, you disrespect me, and when you disrespect me, you disrespect the US Marines." I have quite literally no idea what they mean by that, but this is obviously just a bad situation to be in. The couple quietly snuck out of the tent and got into their truck, where they drove to the nearest motel in the closest town. In the morning they headed back to the campsite so that they could collect their belongings that they had to abandon. When they got there, there was another family there who had stayed the night there as well. This family explained to them that the singing and chanting continued for another 2 to to 3 hours after they had escaped in the truck. I can't believe that this family stuck it through the night, because I absolutely would have noped out of there as quickly as I possibly could. Who knows what that whistling guy was up to, but he definitely knows how to freak people out.
Coming into number 10, we have the Yellowstone bear attack. I was always told by my friends in Ontario that I shouldn't be too afraid of black bears because they're not going to kill you, it's the grizzlies you need to watch out for. Now I don't know if that's true or not, but in 2010 a grizzly bear rampaged through a heavily occupied campground in Soda Butte near Yellowstone National Park. This all went down in the middle of the night, and sadly one man, Kevin Kammer, was killed and 2 other people were seriously injured. A woman suffered severe lacerations and crushed bones from bites on her arms, and a man had part of his calf ripped off. Other campers ran to their cars to hide from the mother bear and her cubs. Now it seems the bear had wandered into the chained campground and started slashing at tents. One survivor, Deb Freely, said she was woken to feel her arm being bitten into. She said when she woke up her tent was totally slashed. Worryingly, she said nobody stopped to help her. She only survived by playing dead, and after a while was able to grab her bear spray, although at this point the bear and the cubs had moved on and eaten another man. The attack was the most vicious and brazen in Yellowstone since the 1980s. The bear sadly after that was euthanized. Okay, next up, let this be a warning to anyone who uses a mini barbecue and brings it into a tent for warmth. Don't do it. Coming into number 9, we have death by carbon monoxide. In 2013, a 14-year-old girl was killed by fumes when her parents placed a bucket barbecue in the tent that they were sharing. Their family tried to minimize the fire damage but had no idea that contained burning coals produce carbon monoxide. Now if this is trapped in an enclosed space like a tent, it can and will kill. The incident took place at a campsite in Bucknell, Shropshire, United Kingdom. Hannah Thomas Jones was the closest to the barbecue and died overnight. Her mother Danielle Jones suffered carbon monoxide poisoning. She woke up and she couldn't move her limbs. Sadly, other members of the camping party found the child's body in the morning and called an ambulance, but it was too late to save her. Once again, don't bring coals or anything like that into your tent while you're camping. Coming into number 6, we have the Hangmans Tree. The Holcomb Valley Campground in Big Bear, California is a lovely place to camp, just don't go wandering near Hangman's Tree. The camping ground is near a mining ghost town, and if the ruins of an old settlement weren't enough to freak you out, nestled deep within the woods is Hangman's Tree, and this is an area that was used to enforce the law or even enact revenge in the 1800s. The area was huge with the Californian gold rush, and it attracted a few unscrupulous characters who were brought to justice here. Many campers who have hiked to the tree have reported paranormal goings on and strange whisperings in the area. Some say that a gold smuggler uttered a curse as he was hung by the tree. I'm not sure that I'd fancy camping near all that bad juju. Coming into number 5, we have the ghosts of the Hawaiian night marchers. On the 5th of July 1995, Ricky, his girlfriend Jennifer, his friend Richard and Richard's son Ryan all went camping on a Hawaiian beach. Specifically, they were camping on Mokulia Beach on the island of Oahu. While they were on the beach at 10 PM at night, they saw distant flashes of light. Then, they saw a long line of torches on a mountain in the distance. It appears that they happened to spot the Night Marchers, a Hawaiian folk legend that says phantoms of ancient Hawaiian warriors roam the islands at night. Rumour has it if you share any blood relation with the Marchers you will be saved, or else you can pee on yourself for redemption. If you're in the path of a night marcher, you must strip naked and lay face down wherever you are. It seems that the group camping that night got lucky. They lived to tell the tale. Coming into number 4, we have the horrifying Lake Bodom murders. This is one of the most notorious unsolved crimes in Finnish history. In 1960, 4 teenagers were camping by Lake Bodom in Finland. What happened between the evening and the morning when 3 of the 4 youths were found brutally murdered, we aren't quite sure. A slashed and bloodied collapsed tent was discovered by a hiker the next morning, and when he went to investigate, 2 15-year-old girls and an 18-year-old boy were battered and stabbed to death. A 4th was left stabbed and unconscious. One of the girls, Malia Bjorklund, had been stripped naked from the waist down and had received the most stab wounds. Upon discovering the horrifying scene, hiker Risto Siren called the police and an ambulance. Luckily, the life of 18-year-old Niels Wilhelm Gustafsson was saved. Gustafsson was the sole survivor. He had concussion, facial bruises and fractures. He recalled seeing a vision of a black and red cloak clothed attacker, which is terrifying. Now I can't imagine being Siren, the hiker who found them all, having to see all of that with your own eyes. That would really haunt me forever. Coming into number 2, we have the mystery of the Dyatlov Pass incident. Something horrible happened to 9 ski hikers in northern Ural Mountains in Soviet Russia between the evening of February the 1st and the morning of the February 2nd, 1959. The group were experienced winter trekkers who had set up camp for the night on the slopes. On the morning of the 2nd of February, the bodies of the campers were found in a very disturbing scene. It seems that something in the night caused the group to tear out of their own tents without proper clothing to face the sub-zero snowy climate. 6 of the group died of hypothermia, 3 died from major fractures. 1 victim had their head bashed in, 2 others had crushed chests. Now 1 woman even had her tongue and eyes missing. The Soviet authorities investigated the suspicious deaths, but the case remains unsolved. Leading theories include an animal attack, an avalanche scare, infrasound, panic, or assassination. Others say it could be paradoxical undressing from hypothermia, which causes people to act crazily. Others say it even could have been a yeti, or some say aliens. If in doubt, crack the alien theory out. The area remained closed for investigation for 3 years, but it is now open and has been named the Dyatlov Pass in memorial of Igor Dyatlov, the 23-year-old leader of the group.
Number 10. The Boulder. This pair of rangers responded to a distress call at 4 in the morning that had come from a family camping in Joshua Tree. The story they heard from the family was something they likely hadn't expected to hear. One member of the family was woken up in the middle of the night when a pebble fell from a large boulder next to their site and hit their tent. When they got up, they looked towards the boulder and saw a humanoid creature standing on top of it. They described it as very skinny and strange looking, moving in weird ways, and its eyes glowing in the dark. They said they couldn't mistake it for an animal since it had a flat face, not like a mountain lion or a coyote. As they watched, the creature seems to go down on all 4s, crawling down the rock before ascending it again and standing up. He had originally brushed it off as one of his cousins trying to play a prank, but once everyone had woken up, it was clear his whole family was accounted for. As they called out to it, it ran away, and he shined a light on it and said he can't really describe what he saw, except that it appeared to be naked and had a black mark on its body. The rangers tried to calm the family down by saying it was a mountain lion with mange, but I think we all know that what they saw was more than just a big cat. Number 9. Artifacts. One ranger for a coastal park in South Carolina recounts his experience from opening up the park in the mornings. When preparing the park in the morning, you have to go on a complete park tour, which also means riding down the beach. The ranger said that in his 2 years working there, he would often find turkeys and chickens chained up on the beach, placed there to pass away when the high tide came. They also recounted finding many different strange artifacts that were either left behind or had washed up on the coast, including things like random bones or pieces of clothing. He spoke to some of the other staff there, and many told him that this was the remnants of black magic. They also told him not to confuse it with root magic. While root magic is typically used for positive things like asking for love, health, or luck, black magic is generally more negative and usually involves a sacrifice, hence the chickens and turkeys that they had often found. Number 8. Something near the campsite. A group that consisted of a park ranger and 3 botany nerds were hiking in the woods for a few days when they had an incredibly scary experience. Day 1 went off with no problems, but around dusk on day 2, they were startled by the sound of a scream. As they were all pretty experienced, they brushed it off as a coyote and just looked around the area. The next day, however, things got worse as they heard what they described as a tree falling down. As they searched around, they all saw a figure in the bushes looking out towards their campsite. They all started yelling loudly as they thought that maybe it was just a bear that they could scare off. But it wasn't a bear. They saw the figure again, a tall man seeming to be leaning over something and turning to look towards them again. When it stood up, it looked to be over 6 feet tall. As the ranger raised his weapon towards it in fear, it took off into the forest, apparently faster than any human or animal should be able to run. When they went back to the area to see what the man had been leaning over, they found the remains of an animal, but not looking like it had simply been attacked by some other predator. The group were rightfully scared and packed up camp, leaving the area, fearing what they thought might have been a Wendigo. Number 7. No tracks. This story comes from an instructor for a therapeutic wilderness program where he was in charge of the at-risk youth. He was on the clock in charge of the program for 16 days, 24 hours a day. His second year working with the program, he was staying at a campsite with the group, the shelters just being simple yurts. When they settled down that night, it had snowed, leaving a pretty thick coverage on the ground. He was woken up at around 1 in the morning when one camper had to go to the bathroom. When the camper returned, he told the instructor that he had seen someone out there wearing a plaid shirt. He brushed it off as when he looked out, he didn't see anyone. But eventually, a few hours later, nature called him as well. And when he was out there, he saw someone standing in a plaid shirt. He quickly grabbed his flashlight to shine it on the figure, but in the split second it took him, the person disappeared. No sign of him anywhere around the area. He woke up another instructor to go and search for the person, but they didn't find anything. The scariest part? They didn't even find a single footprint in the snow. Number 6. Strange encounter. This one is short and sweet, but I think one of the most bizarre and scary on this list for how real it is. The worker was surveying a restoration site near an old trail when he heard somebody walking up a nearby path. He grabbed all of his things and proceeded down the trail, walking confidently so as not to give the other person the idea that he could be easily taken advantage of. When he turned the corner on the trail, he saw a shirtless man swinging a crowbar around wildly. The man made eye contact with him and yelled out, "I've got a crowbar, I've got a crowbar." The worker mumbled out a quick, "Nice crowbar," before turning around and running back to his truck. So no ghosts or mythical beasts in this story, just a terrifying man wielding a crowbar. Totally normal. Number 5. Banjo audience. One park ranger was taking care of 2 pretty remote parks, about 30 miles out from any occupied homes. And even then, these houses were usually empty during the summer months. One night he decided to hop into his car and head to one of the darker parks so that he could take in the meteor shower that was going to be happening and also get in some practice on his new banjo. He was sitting on a park bench under the stars playing with the banjo strings when he started to get an uneasy feeling in his gut. No, he hadn't eaten some bad food, he was getting the feeling that somebody was watching him. Questions started to go through his head like, what if someone shows up? This is the burned car park, what if they come back? He continued playing to try and avoid the silence when he heard sounds coming from the bushes and he started to really panic. The sounds seemed high-pitched and he started to wonder what reason children could have to be deep in the park late at night. As it turns out, it wasn't children. Instead, 3 coyotes came running out of the bush. Apparently they'd been enjoying the concert. Number 4. PHILMONT Scout Ranch. A ranger who worked at PHILMONT Scout Ranch in New Mexico told his story of what had happened on one of his trips, it being a summer camp combined with a backpacking trek. The group were around Uraca Mesa. It's in the shape of a skull and has various different legends surrounding it, like it being haunted or even being a portal to the underworld. One of these stories is that at night you can see strange and unexplained lights coming from the top. Well, this ranger had worked there for 4 years now and never saw them, thinking it was just some crap made up by the other staff. Until one night, a kid pointed up at the mesa and made notice of lights coming from the top. The ranger brushed it off as being the lights of the other group who would be joining them. But when he looked, he realized the lights weren't coming from the trail. They were coming from off to the right behind the mesa, and it didn't look like flashlights at all. They were bright blue. 15 minutes later, the other group arrived and the lights were still there, putting away any ideas that it might have been them. To this day, he has no explanation for what the lights could have been. Number 3. Intense pressure. This story comes from a worker who was doing a survey in a park in the interior of British Columbia. Most of the rest of the crew had already gone home, leaving behind just him and his boss together for a few days to confirm coordinates and finish up some mapping. They made their way out to one area on an old logging route, and from the second they got there, he said that things felt off. 15 minutes later, they heard an incredibly loud whomp sound, saying he could feel the pressure in his ears. He looked towards his boss, who also looked incredibly pale, and they heard the sound again, saying the intense ear pressure and chest pressure made him feel like he was being squeezed. They immediately packed up and left, not discussing the event and never figuring out what it was. But he says that it was most similar to the feeling and sound of a giant bird flapping its wings, leaving many people to believe that he had experienced the legendary Thunderbird. Number 2. The Soldiers. A crew of about 10 people were out in a park in Washington state building dig lines. They were deep into it, about 60 miles from any other sign of life. As they were walking, they came across a clearing. The weird part was that there were 2 helicopters there, along with 7 fully armed military personnel. They had pointed their rifles at the crew, demanding to know what they were doing in the area. They said that they were doing dig lines and had been scheduled to be there, putting their hands up in fear. The soldiers told them to turn around and leave and forget they were ever there. The frightened people said that they were doing government work and they had to be there. One of the military men responded by saying, "No, you're not today, get the F out of here." They weren't going to argue with that, so they turned around and quickly went on their way. I'm sure we've all thought at least once that the government is hiding something from us, and this is a good sign that there's more than meets the eye. I'm not gonna tell you they were guarding aliens, but I bet they were guarding aliens. Number 1. Abandoned. This one comes not from a forest ranger, but instead from a soil conservationist who spent a lot of time looking at cropland and prairie restorations, saying it wasn't uncommon for him to find himself miles from the nearest road. One time he was in a pretty heavily wooded area of his county, about a mile from the road, when he came across a clearing. But it wasn't empty. Instead, it was an abandoned playground and school bus with a rusty swing set and a huge rainbow merry-go-round. While this is creepy enough on its own, he was extra terrified by the fact that the merry-go-round was spinning rapidly in circles, with nothing in sight that would have caused it to move. He called out, and it didn't seem that any people or animals were around the area. Freaked out, he turned around and made his way back. He thought it must have been an old school, so he asked his archaeologist to look and see if anything had ever existed there, but they couldn't find anything about it or why there would have been a playground deep in the woods.